One of the most important things that organisms do is reproduce, because if they didn't, then when they died, their species would go extinct. DNA is one of the keys for reproduction, and they code for genes, which are stored on chromosomes on eukaryotes. In prokaryotes, we know the DNA is just kind of free-floating in the cell and reproduces, and so we'll learn a little bit about DNA, genes, alleles, and our genome. DNA by itself is kind of a simple double helix strand, and it's made up of nucleotides that go across there with the phosphate and sugar on the ends. And as DNA starts to condense in eukaryotes and prokaryotes, it's just free-flowing like this. It wraps around these little proteins called histones, which help give it some structure. And then as they become more condensed, we get what is called a chromosome. And if you remember from the cell cycle, it's going to be more like this format in interphase, and it becomes this condensed chromosome during prophase, and that makes it a lot easier to organize the information and make sure each side is getting an equal copy of everything. So it's more like chromatin here and chromosomes as it gets into prophase. You've seen this picture already. In the cells here, you can see that there's just some genetic balls of information there. You can't tell anything. And then in a cell like this, we have the much more condensed chromosomes where you can actually see the individual chromosomes. And that's the changes DNA undergoes as it prepares for mitosis, like you learned about. But all the information that we need is stored in there. So in our genes, just to tell you what a gene is, it's a stretch of DNA or RNA that inherit the code for a specific protein. And we'll learn how those proteins are coded for a little bit later. And it's the basic unit of heredity. And it typically takes long strands of DNA just to code for one gene, because it's going to be made up of many amino acids for each protein. And if you remember, we call those chains of amino acids polypeptides. Now the genes code for these proteins, and you can have the same gene, different forms of it, called alleles. So maybe there's a gene that'll code for a protein that makes your hair blonde, and a different allele might be coding for a protein that makes your hair brown, or something like that. Or maybe one produces melanin in your skin, which would make it darker, and one does not. Now, if we look at, here's an example of a chromosome. You can see these different codes all the way down in these different bands, which represent various genes and gene loci that are on the chromosome. And when we get this entire spelling out of what's on every chromosome and every gene that's on every chromosome, we call that a genome. And they have actually now mapped the human genome, so they know on all 23 chromosomes that humans have where every gene loci is for just about every trait that we have. And so that is a quick summary of our genetic information as it's stored in DNA, and those strands of DNA and long chains of nucleic acid, nucleotide sequences make our genes. We can have varieties of genes called alleles, but they code for the same thing. For instance, these would be 2 alleles for hair color, and our total sequence is called a genome.